Well, here we go again. It is time for the second Championship Manager special of the season, and I think it's fair to say that this one is a little more surprising than the first, certainly based on results and the league table. Because yes, we are back today to talk about a bizarre week for Birmingham City, who have sacked John Eustace despite being in the Championship playoff places after a very strong start to the season, with a very good young side recruited in the summer, and have appointed Wayne Rooney after he failed to make the playoffs at DC United in the MLS and has now left the club and moved back to England. We're going to pick the bones out of this one, talking about Eustace and his time in charge at the club, and then moving on to Wayne Rooney, what we can expect from him and whether or not this appointment can be a success. So I hope you're looking forward to all of that. You'll have noticed that we have been putting polls out over the last few days about whether you think it's the right decision, and particularly what you thought of the sacking of John Eustace. And almost 90% of fans across the YouTube community and across all the social medias seem to think this is the wrong decision. However, we are going to talk about the old man first. Let's cover the time in charge from John Eustace, because I think it's fair to say that John Eustace, in a very difficult time for Birmingham City, united the club. So Eustace took charge back in the summer of 2022. At that point, Birmingham City were relegation favourites, were a mess off the pitch, were losing parts of the stadium to closure, and just looked like a club, quite frankly, that was on its way down. In fact, at the start of last season, both myself and Craig predicted Birmingham to be relegated from the Championship to League One, and we weren't alone. Most pundits and most other podcasts went for a similar thing, with Birmingham either battling for or succumbing to relegation in the 22-23 season. But this is where John Eustace probably gets the most praise, because he didn't just keep Birmingham City up last year. Yes, at times the football wasn't brilliant to watch. Away from home, on the opening day at my club Luton Town, Birmingham played for a 0-0 draw. But you know what? They got it. They set up brilliantly. They were tactically very astute, and defensively, for the most part last season, they were absolutely incredible. This just wasn't a team that was united. This wasn't a team that was working hard. This is a team that were well coached, and John Eustace has to take the credit for that. This season, after comfortably surviving, we've seen a recruitment of a brilliant young squad under new ownership. Of course, the parts of St Andrews that need it are being redeveloped, and we'll move on to the ownership and the job they've done in a moment. But for John Eustace this season, we've almost seen an evolution. No longer just playing for draws away from home, but starting to push on, starting to score goals, and starting to have a bit more of a creative force. We've seen more advanced fullbacks, younger players who are able to get forward and support attacks. One of them we know very well, because Cody Dramate was on loan from Luton last season, and of course Talif Chong went the other way earlier in the summer. But Birmingham have invested wisely, which credit has to go to both the board, the recruitment team, and of course John Eustace involved in that. What John's done on the pitch, though, is lead Birmingham City to the playoffs. With 11 games gone this season, they've picked up 18 points. They're on back-to-back victories before the international break, albeit a dodgy penalty helped start the turnaround against West Brom. But brilliant against Huddersfield at home, some really good victories as well. And even in those games where they weren't winning, they've been quite hard to beat at times, which is the most important thing you can be in a championship. So John Eustace, for me, and I'm sure most Birmingham fans watching this will agree, has done an absolutely fantastic job. A win rate overall of 33%. He won a third of his games in charge, but when you consider the backdrop to last season, that record looks particularly impressive. And this season, I had no doubt that they were going to be in that top half. They were, if you go back to our pre-season predictions for the Championship, they were my dark horse to be an outsider for the playoffs. I predicted them to finish in the top half in 11th place, I think. You can check the notes in the description of that video. But overall, John Eustace has overachieved at Birmingham, and with the club moving in the right direction off the pitch, it was a real chance for him to take them that way on it, and I firmly believe they could have been contenders for the playoffs. However, the board clearly disagreed, because the new American consortium at Birmingham City, as we've seen at quite a few other clubs in the UK in recent months, have decided to go with a different style of manager, rather than focusing on a manager that's been successful. It's a modern trend we're starting to see more and more. I think of Bournemouth as an example, who let Gary O'Neill go last summer after completing a miracle in keeping them in the Premier League, and now they haven't won a game since. We also go back to Birmingham City a few years ago, who sacked Gary Rowett who had had a brilliant start to the season, was overachieving just outside the playoffs. They brought in Gianfranco Zola, and I think we all know how the rest went. They ended up with Harry Redknapp saving them in the final couple of games. So that's what makes this all the more confusing, because out goes John Eustace and in comes Wayne Rooney on a 3.5-year deal. He comes in as manager, not head coach. The wording very important there in terms of transfers, recruitment and other stuff. And he will be assisted by former England teammate Ashley Cole, John O'Shea, who is still the assistant manager of the Republic of Ireland at the minute, and also a couple of others who were with him at DC United, including Carl Robinson. Not that one, but one that played in the UK as well. Mike Taylor does remain at the club, which is important. But overall, this has been a move that has divided football fans, and certainly hasn't been popular with most Birmingham fans. And I think that is potentially the biggest worry going into this. So if we have a quick talk about the statement, because the statement for John Eustace leaving the club I thought was borderline disrespectful. The fact that they started with what they wanted and the fact that he wasn't that, despite the fact he was actually delivering on most of it, I think most of us expect that this is a commercial decision rather than just a footballing one. But this is what Tom Wagner said anyway. Wayne is a born winner. We believe with the support of his coaching staff, the club and our supporters, he will take the Blues forward on the next stage of our journey. His playing philosophy will help us realise the ambitions we have set for Birmingham City. Wayne has been preparing for an opportunity like this since he embarked on his coaching education, and he will have the full support of the board and everybody at the club. Chief Executive Gary Cook, who also put out a statement yesterday, said, "We're incredibly excited by Wayne's arrival. When the opportunity presents itself to appoint a manager who shares your ambition and is both a student and a great of the game, then you act, and this is what we've done. We're confident his appointment, supported by his handpicked coaching staff, will culminate in a young, attack-minded team that will excite our fans." The statement goes on, and there's plenty of talk about Craig Gardner, squad recruitment and all of that stuff too. However, this is one that I find really interesting, because I look back at the statement and I look at the start of this season and I look at what they're wanting to achieve. So firstly, a manager that matches their ambition. This is a statement that's used quite frequently. Most managers want to get results, and I'm pretty sure that John Eustace's ambition would be to get Birmingham up and around the playoffs, or to compete and to push forward. So I don't think him and Wayne Rooney would have any different in mentality. They'll both want to win games. They'll both want to move forward. Now, style of play we can talk about a little bit, because we've seen a lot of football in the Championship over the years, and maybe what Burnley did last year has maybe convinced a few owners that it can be done regularly, but it's not something we see often. Generally, the sides that get promoted for the Championship are the most consistent, are the most lean defensively, and are often the sides that are hard to beat. I look at my club Luton last year, who finished third, who overachieved to get in the playoffs on a small budget the year before, and away from home, they were incredibly hard to beat in at least 2/3, 3/4 of the away games in a season. At home, they're keeping clean sheets for fun, and these are the types of teams that generally go up. Now, we mentioned what happened with Birmingham before. We've also seen it a couple of years ago with Hull, who went for Shota Arveladze for a change of style. It didn't work out. And my worry in this situation is that very rarely do these types of changes actually work positively. There have been a few examples in the past, but in the Championship, they are few and far between, sadly. Now, the other thing I'd say on the playing style front is that certainly at home this year, watching the West Brom game, seeing the extended highlights of the Huddersfield one, Birmingham have definitely been a more aggressive and progressive side this season than they were last. Last year, they didn't have the players to play an expansive style. They had a fairly experienced squad in places and a few dotted youngsters in between that, quite frankly, were at the very early stages of their careers. So you had to protect that team a little bit and try and get results, particularly when the squad in comparison to the Championship was nowhere near as strong. This season, they've built a young side that should be competing for the top half, that's got bundles of energy in key areas out wide and in the engine room of midfield, and they're playing in a way that suits that, particularly at home, and they're getting results. That's the bit I don't understand here. So as much as the board have to be credited for doing really positive things off the pitch in terms of the rebuilding of the stands of the stadium that needed it and investing money into the club in key areas off the pitch, this decision on it for me is one that is a little bit strange. However, let's talk about Wayne Rooney, the new man, because there is no doubt that his sides do like to play entertaining, attacking football, and he has worked well with young players before. Now, I've seen most of the ridicule about Rooney's appointment, has been relating to his win percentage, which is lower than John Eustace in every job he's been in. But I think we've got to be fair here to Wayne as well. While I think you can probably already tell that I don't really agree with this decision, it's not fair to say Wayne Rooney's an awful manager because his win percent was 28 at Derby. Now, we can talk about the DC United one a bit later, but let's talk first about his job in the Championship at the Rams, because he took over in a situation, well, fairly similar to what John Eustace had when he took over at Birmingham. Absolute chaos off the pitch. Of course, initially in his first half season with Derby, he took over a side in the relegation zone and kept them up. However, the following year, Derby were hit overall with 21 points worth of deductions. And Birmingham City are very keen in their statement to point out that he managed to accumulate 55 points that season with Derby, and that's true. And he did very well with a very young side. He was able to shut out a lot of the outside noise. He again united the club and got the fans on side. And he played some really good football, despite losing players left, right and centre, despite a lot of the experienced ones going for cheap. He used the youth system, he used the good players coming through, and he really did well with them. I don't think that it's a fair reflection on Wayne Rooney's job at Derby to say, look, he had a 28% win rate. However, away from home, the results weren't always there, and you could argue that that expansive style cost them results, rather than gaining them points here and there, as we've seen a lot with Birmingham this season. So I do wonder whether that style of play is actually going to backfire compared to what John Eustace was doing, particularly in those away games. But Wayne Rooney, based on his previous job in England, is certainly not as bad an appointment as some are making him out to be. I think partly because of the shock of the decision being made. If we move on to DC United and the MLS though, there is no doubt that it was a disappointing job for Rooney, because they had the 5th biggest budget but failed to make the MLS playoffs, which has to be considered a failure in the circumstances. And he wasn't able to galvanise them and get the same style of play, and in fact ended with a lower winning percentage and a lower goals per game ratio, which is not ideal. So in terms of the attacking football and intent, it is hard based on the DC United job to suggest where that's coming from. But my worry actually based on the Derby job is more playing away from home. I feel the Birmingham board are determined to do this in the sexy way of winning promotion, as we saw with Burnley last year. But actually, even at times there, I watched Burnley come to Kenilworth Road and it was virtually a stalemate, and it ground out a 1-0 away win. Is exactly the type of performance you expect to see in a championship. And ultimately, for all of the things in the statement, talking about winning mentality, they mention he's one of the greats of the game as a player, which bears no resemblance to a managerial career. I think we all know this is a commercial decision, and ultimately, time will tell whether on the pitch it works. The jury's out for me on that front. I certainly don't feel as convinced of a good season for them as I did when John Eustace was in charge. Let's move on to the biggest problem for Wayne Rooney though, because it's probably not his managerial skills, it's probably not his coaching team, and it's probably not actually anything to do with the football inside. It is the reaction to what's happened. John Eustace was tasked with uniting the club, and he's done that. That's made him incredibly popular with Birmingham City supporters. And as a result of the change, particularly when they're in such a good position, Wayne Rooney's going to have to do a lot to win over the Birmingham City fans. And he's going to have to show that he's wholeheartedly in for the job, and that most importantly, he's able to deliver the outcomes that John Eustace did, which is at the moment 6th place in the Championship and a very good season last season in the circumstances. If we have a look though at what Birmingham City have got coming up, I almost feel a little bit sorry for him, because his next 5 games on paper are an absolute disaster, to be honest. If you had 5 games in the Championship you wanted to come into, these probably wouldn't be it. He's got 5 games after this international break before the next one. He goes away to a resurgent Middlesbrough that are now flying and can't stop winning and scoring. A home to Hull, an interesting dynamic there. Liam Rosenior, a man who he worked with at Derby County, of course in a dugout at Hull. Then away to Southampton, who, yes, have had a little poor spell, but are a relegated Premier League club. A home to high-flying Ipswich, and away to a Sunderland side that have impressed for the most part again. That spell of 5 games, you could conceivably see an outcome where Birmingham City don't win a game. And imagine the pressure he's going to be under if he comes in after a manager who's left the club in 6th after back-to-back victories with 7 goals in 2 games, and he doesn't win them. Because that's the pressure for Rooney now. He has to start well to get the fans on side. And it doesn't matter to the fans that these are 5 tricky games coming up. If he doesn't get a win, or he only picks up 3 or 4 points out of them, the immediate question is going to be, why have you sacked a manager for a less successful one? Yes, after that November international break, there is a much kinder run of fixtures, home games against the likes of Sheffield Wednesday and Rotherham, who you would expect to perhaps be closer to the bottom of the league this season. But ultimately for Wayne Rooney, the biggest test is this first 5 games. I'm going to stick my neck on the line and say that in those 5, he probably won't do enough to win the Birmingham fans over. But I guess the positive, and I go back to again a situation with my club last year where Rob Edwards came in for Nathan Jones. Okay, in different circumstances, Jones leaving rather than being sacked. But you have got a club that isn't in crisis. You've got a club that's on the up, that's playing well, that's got a good structure, and you've only got to add a little bit to it. If he's sensible enough to tweak the style rather than try and revolutionise it immediately, then I feel Birmingham City can still have a very good season. But ultimately, I do feel it's a tricky start for Rooney. The big question we normally ask in these podcasts, and unfortunately, Craig is on holiday, so not here to ask it for me today, is whether or not the manager sees out his contract. And I think we have to say, based on the average Championship manager lifespan, that no, he probably won't see out a 3.5-year deal. If he does very well, he'll likely be poached. And if he doesn't do very well, he'll likely be gone very quickly. I just hope for Birmingham fans that this isn't a repeat of the row at Zola situation. I do feel that the foundations are better at the club now with Eustace, and he does take credit for that. But I would be lying to you if I said I wasn't a little bit worried about this appointment, and certainly the timing of the change and the nature of the change, and more importantly, the reasons given for it. If you're a Birmingham City fan though, I'd love to know what you think about this, and as well if you're a Derby fan, because you'll probably know Wayne Rooney's management better than anyone. Let me know in the comments what you've thought of this week at Birmingham City, what your hopes are for the rest of the season. Do you still think you can continue in this upward trajectory, or do you think this is actually going to be a bad decision? I'm interested to get your thoughts on that, and regardless of how harsh you think the Eustace sacking is, do you think Wayne Rooney will be a success at Birmingham City? My thoughts are a little bit mixed on this. I think it's an incredibly poor sacking. I think John Eustace was the right man. But on the flip side of that, I'm not sure Wayne Rooney was as bad as some people are making out from his Derby stint in particular. So it's going to be interesting to see how it goes. I think most people agree here that John Eustace shouldn't have been sacked. But let me know in the comments what you thought of this crazy week at Birmingham. If you enjoyed it, please do put a thumbs up on the video. Don't forget, we have Championship score predictions every single match day. Subscribe and turn the notification bell on to stay up to date with them. You can find the playlist so far for this season up in the eye above, as well as our pre-season predictions for the Championship season. There's also plenty more to come, including another very special interview, Luton Premier League previews and predictions, League One Shorts predictions which return tomorrow, and of course a manager special that is due pretty soon elsewhere in the Championship too. We'll keep an eye out for who Sheffield Wednesday appoint. But thank you very much for watching as always. Your support is greatly appreciated. We'll see you back here soon. More Championship content on the podcast.